Thank you. My name is Bertha Ochieng, and I'm a professor of integrated health and social care at De Montfort University. And I'm also privileged to be co-leading the Mental Health and Psychological Resilience Project, which is a project that we are running in partnership with the Leicester City Council. This project is also part of the DMU Local Plus portfolio, which aims to support our university's mission to the public good. The objective of the DMU Local Plus initiative is threefold. The first one is to work with our colleagues in the Leicester City Council to enhance the university's commitment to the public good. In addition to that, to make available to the Leicester City Council colleagues and staff there the expertise of the DMU staff. And finally, to create a framework to share expertise and partnership work between the DMU staff and local authority in meeting the needs of our communities. Once again, welcome to you all. We really appreciate you all joining us at our Festival of Teaching event. Before we begin today's event, I want to say a special thank you to colleagues from the De Montfort University and Public Health Leicester Council. In particular, Andy Keeling from the local authority, who is the Chief Operating Officer, Professor Ivan Brown, who is the Director of Public Health, Mark Whitley and Catherine Crook, who are both leads of mental health within the local authority. At De Montfort University, our thanks go to Professor David Mba, who is the PVC Research and Enterprise, Dr. Jagdish Chauhan, Dr. Ian Williamson, my colleagues who will be presenting today, Dr. Andrew Clifton and Dr. Tanya Hart, for their commitment shown to the community engagement project that you'll hear more about. At today's event, we will begin with a presentation from Dr. Tanya Hart, which will provide for us the project overview of the mental health and psychological resilience. This will be followed by Dr. Andrew Clifton, who will be looking at loneliness and mental health challenges during a pandemic, focus on Leicester City. Following the two presentations, we will be joined by our two students to our final panel discussion. I now wish to invite Dr. Tanya Hart. Dr. Tanya is an associate professor in learning disability and mental health. She's also the head of division of learning disability and mental health within the Faculty of Health and Life Sciences at the De Montfort University. Tanya is currently on secondment and is working with the lead workforce development with Leicester City, Leicestershire and Rutland. She's a lead there in terms of mental health with schools, and she's a program manager also. Tanya's area of expertise centers around well-being and mental health, with a special focus on children already experiencing mental health difficulties in the school setting. Tanya has been involved in various national and international enterprise projects and evaluations that primarily focus on the promotion of well-being and resilience. She's a qualitative researcher who is not adverse to mixed methods approaches, but prefers methods which explore in more depth the uniqueness of human experience and creative participatory action research methods which can empower individuals. Thank you and a welcome to Tanya.
Thank you, Bertha, for that. Hi, everybody. Next 5 or 10 minutes, I'm just going to go over and look at what our project is all about. We've termed the Mental Health and Resilience, Social Isolation and Coping with COVID-19 in Leicester project, CISL for short. And basically this project's been up and running since October 20 and will run until July 21. And as Bertha said, the project came about in response to the DMU Local Plus call back in April 2020, and was conceived as part of the strategic alliance with Leicester City Council, whereby there was a call for projects which bring benefit to communities in the city, as well as providing real life research and teaching and learning opportunities for the university. In short, a project benefiting both the city and the university. Our project, more specifically, focuses, like Bertha said, on public health engagement, as many public health programs need better community engagement and understanding to be able to influence service provision and health messages to the communities involved, particularly the so-called hard to reach groups. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. Andrew's going to go on and speak about that in more detail. So if we just have a look at our project, we had some broad aims. The project aims was to focus on a better understanding of health, more explicitly mental health and well-being, especially post COVID-19 pandemic, even during the pandemic, if we can consider ourselves post-pandemic at this moment in time. It's as well as exploring how we might better engage with hard to reach populations who are more at risk of psychological distress. So in essence, the project had a dual focus that we can learn more about the needs of the population, but we can also learn more about how we can better engage these hard to reach populations in activity that can promote a better understanding, give them a voice, and ensure that we influence government, local government policy. So we just look at the two identified populations. There was our older adult population. We wanted to really focus on those over 65 and living alone. You will have seen the media, and we know that those people, especially during the pandemic, who are living alone, are particularly vulnerable to psychological difficulties. Our other group, which we wanted to focus on, are individuals accessing mental health support services and who are at risk of isolation. So our inclusion criteria being that they had to be resident in Leicester City boundaries, and those in our older adult group must be known to the tackling isolation in Leicester project run by Leicester City, because obviously we wanted to identify the appropriate people for the project, and they must be able to understand and communicate English. Our group, where we're looking at individuals accessing mental health support services, we really wanted to recruit people who are experiencing or have past experience of mental health problems. So they must be accessing or have accessed within the past 3 years mental health support in their community. Once again, must be resident in the city boundaries, must be over 18. So how will we bring local benefit? The team, as Bertha's given an overview of our team, wanted to develop a safe method of engaging with communities post COVID-19 around the subject of resilience and mental health. So as a team, we had to think how we could influence community change and public health engagement activity. So what we wanted to do was our engagement activity therefore had to consider the implications of COVID-19, the stigma related to mental health, and the sensitivity of the project. We've done this by building on the success and lessons learned from a previous community project, Families Feeding Under Fives in Leicester. We did that in 2019-20, of which our panel member Ben will talk about in a little bit more detail because he was involved with that project. We also wanted to draw from the experience, expertise of the team members in a focus group design. So Bertha and Ian, community, were very much specialists in community engagement and activity. Ragdish, Ian and Bertha, very much specialists in mental health and isolation, as well as Andrew in mental health and isolation. And my background, like Bertha said, is a lot around resilience and community engagement. So in short, to consider the sensitivities of mental health, we've ensured our engagement activity focuses on coping and resilience rather than a strong focus on people's difficulties. Andrew will talk a little bit more about that in a bit. In addition, COVID-19 and the lockdown in March last year meant we needed to also consider the implications of COVID-19 by adapting engagement method successfully by engaging people online. So we're piloting our engagement activity using Microsoft Teams, and we'll do this in April and May of this year. And we wanted to empower. Step 2 was empower those better positioned to engage communities and those who might go on and undertake this work. So we wanted to empower people who sit in Leicester City Council, and part of their responsibility is public engagement. So we've got facilitators as well as students. And then 3 was influence, inform local wellbeing strategy. So what we want to do is write an evidence-based report that data obtained can support the Leicester City Health and Wellbeing Strategy and Action Plan 2018 to 23 on mental health. So in brief, what makes the project unique? First of all, it seeks to enhance the capability of Leicester City public health practitioners and give DMU students insight into public health engagement and research activity. So what we're doing is we're doing 6 focus groups, which will be facilitated, in total 3 for each of our populations. And 6 members of the City County Council Public Health Department will work in pairs to facilitate each focus group. They'll be supported by student volunteers from Level 7 MSc psychological programs, of which Jacob is here to represent those students today on our panel. And all facilitators have experience in public health work, and all have been trained in degree level, may have MA or MSc, and some a PhD. So it's very important that we do that. So how are we going to empower people? With the necessary skills, we've taken a stepped approach. We've just run a 2-day online training opportunity for community facilitators, 2 half-a-days, whereby we've gone through and had various discussions on engagement, how we need to adapt our engagement for virtual delivery, etc., and also safe ways of doing things. So the facilitators are provided with documents and guidance that's been ethically approved, and also prior to any facilitation of any focus groups, we're ensuring that we offer supervision from ourselves, the team, prior, so that we can have regular sort of catch up via Teams, online preparation, etc., so that everybody feels confident in focus group facilitation. And then further opportunity is provided at data analysis stage, so that all of those engaging with this, with our project, will have a say on data interpretation and writing the report. And then it's about also involving everybody in dissemination activity, hence why Ben and Jacob are here today, as well as ourselves. So really our approach is very much about empowerment, collaboration, and building confidence. So those are our key steps, which work very well with our previous DMU local project. So that's just a little bit of an overview of the project to date. It'll be very exciting when we've got our data and we can hopefully bring that back for dissemination. I'm now going to pass over to Andrew, Dr. Andrew Clifton, an associate professor in mental health nursing. Andrew has extensive experience in a number of projects related to mental health and loneliness, because obviously our hard to reach populations were very much tackling those who are alienated or live in isolation. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that, Tanya, and welcome everybody. And just to say, yeah, my background in mental health nursing, as Tanya said, in the last 10 or 15 years, I've been doing a lot of research of people with serious mental illness and other mental health conditions, and also physical health, which I think is very important as well, and often they come together. Yeah, so today I'm going to talk about three things. I'm going to talk about resilience, mental health, and social capital. I'm not going to suggest that there's an interaction between all of these three different things, but I do think they complement each other. And also we're going to take a bit of a critical look at some of the issues, particularly around resilience and social capital. I think it's important as researchers, and when we're engaging with people, that actually, you know, we're open and we're honest and we have a dialogue and a discussion about what some of these terms mean, because often they mean different things to different people, and it's very important that, you know, that researchers, participants, other people who are involved in the research, and when we're talking about our research and when we're talking about our findings and our results, that we are very explicit and clear about terminology. So I want to talk about that just briefly as I go on. I also want to take you back to last year, back to, you know, March and April. I've just got some statistics I wanted to talk about before I started thinking about resilience and mental health and social capital, and it just provides a bit of context. So some from the Office of National Statistics in April, last April, over half of adults said they were affected by the pandemic. Now, that's 50% of the population, and some of the things that people reported to the Office of National Statistics were certainly around loneliness, anxiety, depression and isolation. Okay, and then levels of anxiety declined after the start of lockdown in April. They stabilised in June or July, but they began to see an increase again in September. And again, we had another lockdown, moving into another type of lockdown, and an increase in September again. Okay, and people who were already feeling lonely, that was most strongly associated with reporting high anxiety. So, I mean, when we're thinking about today and we're talking about the challenge of change, I like to think of continuity in change, because actually, you know, there were many people who were already lonely and isolated within Leicester, within Leicestershire and the wider community, and in the UK as well. And many of those people, you know, coming from diverse backgrounds, or older people, younger people, people from, as I said, diverse backgrounds. So again, this is obviously, the pandemic has had a serious impact on people's well-being. However, as I say, some of the issues and problems, and we know already from some of the earlier research and some of the earlier reports about inequalities in health and how that's impact on certain individuals in certain communities. And again, so I think it's important that, you know, even though things have certainly got a lot worse during the pandemic and within certain periods and times of the pandemic, I think it's important that we recognise that actually a lot of these social problems were existence within communities, not just in Leicester, but also in other places as well. And just before we talk about resilience, I think the other thing, and Tanya and Bertha have both touched on it, as a researcher, I think the exciting thing for me to be involved in this partnership, you know, with all the different stakeholders, with the local authorities and the City Council, is that hopefully we can then feed this back into our teaching and learning. You know, I teach in undergraduate and postgraduate courses, and I know that Ben and Jacob are going to talk about that as well, but I think it's very, very important that, you know, the results and the findings are fed back into the teaching that I do. And again, we're teaching the healthcare professionals of the future, and hopefully that will impact on their practice, and hopefully that will become part of the community engagement that Tanya talked about. Okay, so resilience. And I think, funnily enough, we've heard a lot about resilience over the last year, basically. And even today, I was listening to the Radio 2, and I think it's Red Nose Day today. And somebody was saying that there's a lot of projects going on about promoting resilience in young people. And again, it kind of got me thinking about, motherhood and apple pie. That must be a good thing, that we're going to start promoting resilience in young people, but also in the wider community. But as I say, is it, we've got some definitions of resilience here. Again, from Mind UK, again, it's about the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or even significant sources of stress. So obviously, I think we would all agree there's been a lot of threats from the past year, and obviously many people have all had to adapt, and for many people that's been very difficult, and we know that half of the population said that they were affected by the pandemic. Not everybody will be affected in the same way, okay? And not everybody will need support. There's, even from this Office of National Statistics, that many people have reported actually feeling of being more connected, and I'll talk about that in a minute when we think about social capital. Many people have been talking about being more connected, and we've also seen how many volunteers, people, over 1 million volunteers, at the start of the pandemic, came forward to support people in their local communities. But that doesn't change the fact that still that many people have certainly been affected by it in different ways, whether it's loneliness, anxiety, depression, and isolation. And obviously this project, we're going to focus on loneliness, but that general well-being and how people are affected. And I think the critical aspect of resilience, and as I say, something I'm very mindful of myself, is that by promoting resilience, it takes the responsibility away from governments, or it can do. Some people see that. And again, also towards self-responsibility, as if people are, it's their own fault that they're finding it difficult, that they're struggling with their well-being. And obviously the government has applied a lot of emergency measures during the pandemic. But again, there's been criticism of some of those measures as well. And there's also been a criticism around, as I said, the inequalities that already existed within the UK, not just in Leicester, but the whole of the UK as well. And that has an impact on people who have died, but also people who have contracted coronavirus as well. So I think we have to have an open mind about resilience, and we have to work with our partners, our stakeholders. We have to try and come up with a working definition that people are comfortable with, okay? And yes, of course, it is about that ability to bounce back. But where do some of these stresses come from? Okay, where are some of the inequalities? Often we talk about, or I talk about in my research about structure and agency. How much do individual people have in their power to improve their housing conditions, to improve services, if there's a lack of funding in particular services. So yes, resilience is something we have to be aware of. We have to have a working definition that people are comfortable with. So mental health, and just wait to see if the slide changes there. Yeah, there it is, got it now, thanks. So mental health, we've already talked about some of the issues that are around with mental health. Loneliness and social isolation have been a big factor in the pandemic. But as I said, this is something that researchers and policymakers, local authorities, different departments within government have already been talking about. It's been demonstrated again through research that there's been people often spoke about a pandemic of loneliness, funnily enough, or an epidemic of loneliness, that was already beginning to manifest itself even pre-COVID, basically. And as you can see, one of the things that people started to talk about was this notion of social capital, that in the last 10, 20, 30 years, we've lost a lot of social capital. And that's the networks that people were involved in, okay? And again, there's been a kind of counter-argument that actually more social capital and networks have re-emerged over COVID. And again, we don't know if this is true for everybody. This is why research projects like this are very, very important, okay? And again, but people have certainly been impacted on different aspects of their mental health, around isolation, and loneliness. Often we talk about you can be lonely and not be isolated, and you can be isolated but not lonely. So again, that differentiation is very important, that we take that into account and we consider that. Okay. I'm just going to put you onto the final slide now. Okay, so what's this notion of social capital? Well, again, it's about how communities and how individuals. I think there's an association between social capital, resilience, and also mental health and people's well-being. I'm not saying that one impacts on the other, but I think there is a loose association here. It's about the networks that people have, so that when we are feeling particularly vulnerable or stressed, then we can get support from those people. Often people say, if you scratch my back, I will scratch your back, basically. We'll help each other. And that's how many individuals and communities exist and coexist, basically. And as I say, some people have suggested that the pandemic has actually made that social capital re-emerge. I mean, I'm interested in the work of Robert Putnam, who started to write about the disappearance of social capital in many American communities in the 70s and the 80s. And the same thing happened here in the UK in the 80s and the 90s, when many of the steelworks, the coal mines, the shipyards, when many of them were closed down, many communities were split up. And as I say, we can see that locally as well, and we can see it regionally and nationally. Many communities were split up, and those elements of social capital were basically impacted on, and that meant that a lot of individuals, families moved away, families had to travel for work, families had to, I'm probably a good example of that myself. I worked in the shipyards and they all closed down, and about 50% of male unemployment at the time in my local community in Glasgow, and many families had to move away for work, get retraining and re-education, but that had a big impact on social capital. And part of that social capital might be about community resilience, about individual resilience, citizen power, diversity, where you've got diverse communities empowering people. A lot of the stuff that Tanya's been talking about, what this project is aiming to do and achieve, and hopefully, we can impact on those communities, and then that can fit into some of the strategies of Leicester City Council and other authorities as well, and how we can actually build back better, for want of a better phrase of term, which I don't know where I get that from. I think that might have been a government phrase or term that has been used recently. Okay, so I think that's just about me to sum it up. So as I say, I think for me, in this project, is a really good learning exercise for everybody, and the exciting thing will be finding out about how people have managed to cope during this period, and whether people require more services, and whether they can have those targeted services. But I think we have to think about the terminology we're using, that people are included, people are empowered, we have that community engagement. And if there isn't social capital, then we have a responsibility as a community, local authorities, governments, to make sure that those networks are provided for people who don't have the agency to actually provide them for themselves, so that we can create that sense of belonging, feelings of trust and mutuality. Okay, I'm just conscious of time, and I think it's probably a good time to hand back again, and hopefully we'll have a good discussion, and I'm happy to discuss some of these issues as well.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and thank you to Tanya also for providing us with an overview of the project, and for yourself, Andrew, for again reminding us the reimagining of the social capital. Hopefully we'll explore some of these issues that you've both raised during the panel discussion. And if we just move forward now, it is now my pleasure to introduce you to our panel members. And I shall begin by inviting Ben and Jakub, who are both our students at DMU, to introduce themselves and offer any comments on what they have learned about psychology and within Leicester, psychology within the University, Leicester, and COVID resilience. We will then spend the remainder of the time in a moderated discussion with joined by Andrew and Tanya also. So over to you, Ben.
Okay, thank you, Bertha. Hi, everyone. I'm Ben. I'm a PhD student at De Montfort University. My research is exploring the sort of lived experiences, challenges and coping strategies of younger people who are living with mesothelioma, which is a sort of cancer of the lung. And more recently, I've been a part of the ongoing project and collaborative work with the Public Health Group at the Leicester City Council on a project looking at the accounts and experiences of mothers feeding their under 5 children. I'll pass it over to yourself, Jakob, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jacob. I'm a MSc Psychological Wellbeing student. I was also involved with Ben on the project run together with Leicester City Council in feeding children under 5. I'm also a research assistant and voluntary project manager for some of the projects run by Psychological Department at DMU. And I'm here and happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much to both. So we've got a number of questions in terms of as part of the panel discussion. And the first one that I would like to present to the panel is, what are your views on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown on university students and or the Leicester community mental well-being? So if I go to you, Ben, first, what's your views on that?
Yeah, thank you, Bertha. So I suppose my experiences as a student, PhD student in this time, it's probably been very much looking at sort of the isolating effects to some extent of what has really become distance learning, particularly for undergraduates, master's students, throughout the last 12 months that we've had to all go through. So I think to some extent, some of the challenges that we've had to deal with are sort of that lack of social capital that sort of comes therein, which obviously Andrew has been sort of referencing. We've seen obviously a lot of the social groups that students usually attend not being a sort of a realistic possibility, things like sports societies and the such. And sort of the diminishing effect that has had, I think, on the sense of belonging that a lot of students may have felt with the university. So I think that's something that I would kind of put forward at this point. I'll pass it over to yourself, Jakob, as well, your experiences.
I 100% agree with Ben was saying. We see, and I personally see it as current MSc student, that we sort of don't have any social capital. We are not able to meet other students in person. So I personally don't know who else is enrolled in my course, because with, sort of online learning, you rarely see anyone with webcams on. So in that regards, I don't even know how my fellow students look like or where they are from technically. We also see an increase in mental health issues among students, whether it's with being overworked due to the amount of lectures that are online, pre-recorded sessions we have to watch, meetings we have to attend, and assignments to complete, or whether it's due to loneliness and a lack of social capital, which was mentioned here previously and mentioned by Ben as well. So that's something that I'm currently working on with our psychological department to address. And we have making some progress since the start of this academic year. And we are continuing on with sort of short-term interventions that we are putting in place.
Thank you very much to Jakob and to Ben for that perspective, really. I do wonder if Tanya or Andrew, do any of you want to add something there?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I just received an email from a student today, and we're just generally asking and having a chat, making sure everybody touching base, making sure everybody was okay. And I think from this student's perspective, there are still problems. You don't realise how difficult it is for many students. That even about having a laptop at home, and you can imagine, how many students there are, not just in higher education, but in secondary schools and primary schools, to provide laptops, connectivity. I mean, so it's a luxury for many of us, and we forget sometimes about how difficult and challenging some of these, core fundamental things that students need, and the support. And as I say, obviously students are living in the community as well. and it impacts on everybody in different ways. And I think that's a big thing that I've certainly missed, is that face-to-face contact, when you can actually sort a lot of problems out, in a few minutes, but actually the way that we're communicating, the way we're teaching and learning is doing. And don't get me wrong, I think generally it's been quite successful to a certain extent, but just missed out on so many other things. And I think that, the impact of that, it'll take a lot of time. And I suppose that's where we're thinking about that resilience, the individual and the community resilience, and hopefully how we can try and get something around how we can support people in the future.
Thanks for that, Andrew. Tanya, I do wonder if there's anything that you can add to that, and also just reflecting on the Leicester community and some of the work that you're doing.
Yeah, obviously, there's many communities. We're only looking at 2 populations which have suffered in the pandemic, those which are isolated and those who have lived experience of mental health difficulties. But there's so many more communities which are struggling. And certainly I know in the chat forum there's one question from Gary with regard to children. And we know in the media, children, young people have been particularly impacted upon with the pandemic, and it's more, especially teenagers, it's more about that sense of belonging. School is an important part of that. And I know that Gary's asked about, can any of the panel members comment about Leicestershire supporting programmes, adverse childhood experiences? We do know that the CCG, the Care Consortium Group, have invested a lot of money in the whole school approach and are invested in the ACES programme as well as the LINK programme. So I can say, yes, that's happening. Apparently there was a big webinar only yesterday with over 81 teachers. So teachers are getting skilled up on how we support children who are feeling particularly vulnerable, mainly because of their feeling isolated, like you were saying, that sense of belonging, that connection needs to be promoted. We've got to work on that as a community. And
it's something that comes up. Yeah. Oh, sorry, you go ahead, Tanya.
Yeah, and I think what Andrew was saying is the community often has the key to open the door when it comes to connection. Go on.
Right.
I think that idea of connection, it's something that has come up in the research that we have been doing with the Leicester City Council, particularly in relation to COVID. Mothers are continually voicing concern about sort of the social developmental impact of the continuing lockdown on their children. I think it's one of the major concerns that they do continually highlight, and they do talk about, sort of accounts of, perhaps if they've had multiple children, understanding the disparity in what it's like to raise their children pre-COVID as to the last 12 months, the lack of ability to go to play groups, and other similar sort of educational settings. It has been something that's definitely come up in the ongoing community work that we've been doing.
Thank you very much for that insight. So just in the beginning of the discussion, we identified also a number of challenges that as a university, some of our students, at large across the sector really are experiencing, that you've identified, in terms of, the challenges of distance learning, lack of social groups, and also the sense of belonging, lack of sense of belonging. And I do wonder if the panel has got any suggestions or recommendations that you want to offer as a means of addressing some of these challenges, and what in general universities can do to respond to some of these challenges. I'll leave that. Andrew, do you want to give a start on that?
Well, I suppose the simple answer, Bertha, would be more resources and more money. And obviously, we need to... I can see some of our students agreeing with that. But obviously, this all happened and, people had to respond very quickly. And, there were different priorities and competing perspectives as well about, how we were going to support people. And again, that goes right up to the top of government and, how we were going to protect jobs and people's lives. So obviously there's a prioritisation going on here, basically. But as I said, students, were asked to, you know, continue their education, and I think we've got a duty to support them basically, you know, within that, and that is targeting the people who require it and who need it most. Whether it's and again, if I can put in a bit of a shout out for our healthcare students. You know, many of those students were part of the response to the pandemic as well. You know, our second and third year students, you know, particularly our first students who were asked to go into to practice, you know, early on to support that. So it's not just it's not just monetary terms, it's also the psychological well-being and support as well. And again, this is when we go back to this notion of continuity and change. You know, many universities have been trying to support the mental well-being of students over, you know, the past 5 or 6 years. It's been a bigger issue and it's become more prominent. And again, I think the pandemic's brought that centre fold, and hopefully universities will respond to that. You know, I think it's a big issue, it's a big problem, and it's something that, you know, I'm not saying this, you know, this will be a kind of starting point or a re-starting point for it, hopefully.
Thanks for that. Yeah, Ben, do you have any comments in that, as from the perspective of students, in terms of how you can respond? Yeah.
I mean, I think, to be fair to the university, there have been some initiatives that they have put together which have really tried, I think, to attempt to build up a social capital through sort of the online spaces. As a PhD student, there has been, I think, since the start of the academic year for me, we've had a dedicated support group for PhD students across the university. And then obviously more recently, we've even had a new support group set up that kind of goes on a monthly basis, which is sort of more dedicated to people like myself who are kind of doing health-based psychological research. So I think opportunities like that give people the opportunity to, whether it's sort of developing more of a connection with their teaching staff and certainly with their peers. I think things like that should be encouraged where possible, really.
If I may add, I know that the university sort of invested more money into expanding our mental health and well-being counsellor team. So there's more counsellors available for students who are sort of suffering more severe effects of the lockdown. There have been online meetings put in place between staff members and students where sort of you can pop in and chat with staff members on sort of a less formal basis, which facilitates the connections you would normally have in a classroom or sort of hallways and lecture halls. There has also been quite a push, at least within psychological department, to involve more students in research on voluntary basis. So to give them a bit more experience, a bit more stuff to do that's not necessarily related to just watching lectures and pre-recorded sessions online. So that has been quite helpful. I sort of became a member of that program. So I got myself involved in 3 research projects at once, which was partially a mistake because there's sort of a lot to cover. But as Jagdish says, that in comments, the pandemic has a huge impact on young people and teachers and members of staff. I think that we all know from experience. And I just want to say that there is quite a lot being researched about that already. There are qualitative and quantitative research papers that are observing the effects of lockdown and sort of the loneliness. And there's been a huge push to refer to either my generation or the younger ones, because I'm only 23. I don't want to refer to myself as a generation, as a sort of lost childhood generation, particularly those aged between 8 and 15. With the current lockdown, they are not able to build the connections that are so crucial to sort of social and cognitive development of that age. So,
thank you very much for that insight. I think that's really useful. Just to know, it makes me to reflect on another project that I'm doing with parents and babies, and we are coming across babies who've been born in lockdown. And a lot of the things that we take for granted, there are things that they're not experiencing at this stage. Yeah. Tanya, I do wonder if there's anything you wanted to add in terms of how universities can respond. Yeah.
I just think very much agree with everything that everybody said, and Andrew said about resources and money. But I do think it's very important to devolve some of that money down into smaller money pots in order that you can have, like Ben was saying, more social capital. Because I do think participatory research is the way forward, to engage communities, because very often they have their own answers. I'm just thinking about a piece of research that I've done recently in Guyana, which has one of the highest suicide rates in the world, the third highest suicide rate in the world. And we did some participatory research methods around looking at community resilience. And we looked at vulnerable populations, very, very vulnerable populations. But they got together and they had this small money pot, and they made such a massive difference of connecting vulnerable people in their community. And actually, out of this money pot, one group of women, for instance, started a little cottage industry themselves, because they were knitting together whilst talking, and they started to sell their wares, and they were able to not only do social good and improve everybody's health and well-being, but also formulate a little cottage industry. So it just goes to show that a small money pot can really make a difference.
Yeah. And that also touches on the human resilience that we are talking about, and also the social capital in itself. Now, we are all aware in terms of some of the harrowing impacts of the COVID-19, and also some of the changes that we've been forced to make in order to continue living within the pandemic, and also to continue working and learning during lockdown. In your views, are there any changes that we should continue with in the future once the population has been vaccinated and face-to-face returns in the next, I don't know how many months? Do you think there are any changes that we've made that you think we should continue with? Yeah. So who wants to, I'll leave this open to the panel. Yeah.
I suppose the pandemic, we've had lots and lots. You watch it on the news every day. Everybody's talking about mental health. Everybody's talking about well-being. Resilience. Is spoken about. I think it's about keeping the conversation going, getting rid of the stigma, hopefully, so that everybody can sort of, feel more confident talking. Because unfortunately, we've still got the stigma associated with mental health. Just speaking to the youth forum the other day about mental health in schools, for instance, and they still say, one of the most embarrassing things is being taken out of the class to be told to go and see the school counsellor. That's what young people are saying. So, I think we've got a long way to go with stigma. So it's keeping that conversation going.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Jakob, do you have any some of the changes that we've been forced into? Do you think there's anything that perhaps you think we should continue doing? Yeah.
I think that the university in general should encourage sort of online discussion groups for students, where we can just pop in, sort of have a quick catch up, even with members of staff, or not necessarily with members of staff as well, whether it would be within the usual working hours 9 to 5, or whether it would be set up by students themselves. So I ran a few sessions like that and had positive feedback from students, and the sessions were 2 hours long. I was on a Skype for 2 hours waiting for students sort of pop in, pop out, have a quick chat, and the feedback was brilliant, even for sessions run by academics during working hours, that it sort of enables to have the deeper connection that you would normally have in a classroom, to have the discussions you currently can't have outside the classroom, because your meeting finishes, your online lecture finishes, everyone logs off, including the teachers, because they are rushing into another ones, and you just can't have a quick catch up in a hallway on the way to your lectures and their lectures. So that's certainly beneficial.
Thank you very much for that, Jakob. If I pass you over to Ben, do you think there are any changes that perhaps you think that we should be continuing with?
I think really, for the most part, I'd really only echo the views put forward by Tanya and Jakob already. I think to Jakob's point about sort of trying to increase those opportunities for communication between, say, teaching staff and students, I think that's a very good point. Speaking as someone who's both been in the role of a student and then in the kind of more teaching capacity, what I find so important to the entire teaching process is that ability to kind of establish a kind of working relationship and rapport with your students. to sort of try and maximize the teaching exercise. It's really about making sure that students feel able to approach you if they're unsure of anything, whether that's in the classroom setting or otherwise. So I think, you know, as we move away from the kind of, hopefully toward the end of this pandemic situation, that like it's already been said, we don't miss the opportunity and importance of what it is to really communicate openly, establishing those lines of communication, which I think is so conducive to just improving on the learning experience, both for the student, but also actually I think for teachers as well.
Thank you very much for that, Ben. Keeping those lines of communication open between students and academics, excellent. Andrew, do you think there's anything from a perspective of academics that you think the changes that have been made could continue?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a bit of a time to reset, basically, and maybe reconfigure a bit how higher education, I suppose, is delivered, and, you know, where the priorities are and how people learn, taking into account, you know, people's own kind of learning preferences and how we can adapt to that, and again, engaging the community. I think, you know, often academics are, you know, we are criticised for being in our ivory tower. I mean, this is a perfect example of working with the local community, working with students, you know, co-production, the principles that we're applying in this project. So it's very exciting from that perspective. I'm involved in another local research project with a local organisation called Enrich, you know, working with people who are older people and people with a disability. And again, it's very much the same principles as this. And again, so I think that's the way forward. And again, if I can even add another level onto that, you know, I'm interested in multi-level governance, but I think we have to have that connection again at all levels of government, you know, and in education as well. And again, if I can touch on to your level of expertise, Bertha, I think the other thing that's shone a light is not just the inequalities in health, but in that lack of integration between health and social care. You know, hopefully, you know, how we view other members of society and some of the decisions that have been made. So I suppose I would like to see a bit of a reset around that. And I know that's been on the agenda for years and years, actually. I remember going back about 25 years ago as a young nurse, and I was assisting this older lady to have a bath. And somebody came up and said, "Is that a social bath or a health bath?" And I said, "No, it's just a bath, actually." And again, some of those divisions are still there, you know, about whether something's social care and health care. And I think we have to move on that and say, hopefully this might be a bit of a chance to reset some of those things as well.
Thank you for that, Andrew. That's quite a debate, perhaps for our next webinar. Yeah, I just want to share a question from Jagdish. Who specifically to Jacob and to Ben. Can the students talk a little bit about their experiences of working with the local City Council and DMU colleagues and engaging with the community? Do you just want to provide us with a little bit of your perspective and experiences of working in partnership on this project and other projects that you may have done, and in particular engaging with the local communities? Yeah.
I don't know if Ben wants to start or...
No, please, Jacob, after you.
Okay. So I think that, you know, having students integrated in community engagement programs run by university and Leicester City Council is absolutely a brilliant idea, because A, it gives us more knowledge and expertise going towards employability skills and transferable skills. B, secondly, we get to see how all the research we are conducting as a university or independent researchers is being put into practice, which is always nice. I personally enjoy seeing the immediate impacts of what we are doing. That, you know, I always had the perception of academia being, oh yeah, you are publishing papers and research all your life, and it sort of goes towards nothing in many cases. But we can see the real life applications of what we are doing. We can see how sort of local governments are working with local communities, and the fact that they're bringing university students in is a brilliant idea.
Yeah, no, I agree with Jacob, obviously. I think something that I found quite interesting about this project as compared to, say, previous ones that I've been a part of is, again, because of the collaborative work that we're doing with the Leicester City Council. It's kind of having that in the forefront of your mind when you're trying to not only engage these communities, but then think about what's the take-home points, what is the real world impact of the things that are being said by the people that we're working with, both the participants, but also, the services themselves. So how can we kind of then seek to sort of build on the research that we've done and implement it across the city and more broadly, perhaps? So that's definitely been something, and again, is an experience that I think myself and Jakob will be very keen to sort of carry forward, really.
Thank you. That's excellent. And if I could just hear from your experiences also, Tanya and Andrew, as academics, in terms of working with colleagues from the local authority, and focusing on community engagement again,
Well, in brief, I think it's a great project because it's a year long, just under a year, and you work together as a team, both with your fellow colleagues who we share the expertise, but also those from Leicester District Council. So it's a great team effort, and then involving the students is fantastic, and obviously then we bring on the facilitators. So we do feel that we've got a collaborative involvement, which makes it particularly special. I'm excited to see what our findings are, and it will be nice to involve everybody in analysis as well as further dissemination. That's my point.
Andrew, what about yourself?
Yeah, just a couple of things really. I mean, I mentioned about co-production, and as I say, I've been. I think it's a principle, and it's something that I've been working with around for the last 5 or 10 years. I've written a few papers with service users and different stakeholders as well, and I think that is the principle that I'm very interested in, and this is definitely a co-production project that, as I say, excites me, and I think it's. I remember about 10 years ago, I was working on a project, and this term come up, and I don't know if anybody's ever heard it, a boundary spanner. So you span different boundaries, basically, as a researcher, as a healthcare professional, someone working in a local authority, and I think it's a really term that I really like, actually, and I think that's something that we're all doing. We're all spanning different boundaries. Sometimes it can be uncomfortable. Sometimes it can be difficult, be challenging. I think when I started off talking today about how we use language, what language means to different people and different individuals and communities, often we've got a different perspective, and that's not a bad thing. It can be healthy as well to have that dialogue and discussion. But the more we talk to each other, the more we work with each other, the more we co-produce each other, I think then we've got an opportunity to address a lot of the inequalities, a lot of the difficulties in those lack of connections and social capital. Again, I'm just conscious of time here that I don't start talking for everybody else, but as I say, so I think for me, co-production and boundary spanning, and that just means working with different people, different stakeholders, without putting too much of an academic term on
it. Thank you very much for that. I think we've got time just for one final question. It's focusing on the project that you've been doing and some of the work that you've done. What plans do you have in implementing? What strategies are you using in implementing some of the learning that you've had, not just in your teaching, but also in some of the work that you're doing as a student also? What are the skills that you've acquired so far that you think you can carry forward? Yeah. So if I go back to you, if I start with you, Ben, just briefly.
I think sort of, as I sort of mentioned briefly again in the last question, one of the skills that I'm going to try and carry forward going from this is thinking about how we use things, like Andrew was saying, about language and how we can sort of then use that in a way that is better engaging with communities, with service needs, thinking about kind of very applied ways of taking research and implementing it in a kind of real world setting, kind of trying to diminish the ivory tower, as it were. I think sort of reaching out a little bit. So that's something that I think for myself I'm going to carry forward from work like this.
Jakob?
So my takeaway message will be the importance of multidisciplinary teams within sort of healthcare and social care settings. This particular program we are running and the one we had about feeding children under 5 in areas of Leicester just showed how important it is to have a variety or a plethora of expertise and perceptions, because I myself, as a psychology student, I would never consider some aspects of the program we were running as important, just because it's outside my professional education. So that's really interesting to see and have the discussion with different professionals and people who sort of are in the positions where they can make an impact, and seeing how bringing up a team of different people can enhance projects run by sort of within communities and by local councils as well.
Thank you very much for that. I've just been reminded that we are running out of time. So unless you can just respond in a one word, Tanya and Andrew.
No, I'm fine, Bertha. That's lovely. That's a nice way to wrap it all up. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. So once again, thank you to all our presenters for sharing your knowledge. And we believe that this is a really important area and areas that we want to continue studying. We very much look forward to the outcome of the project that you're doing. And hopefully we can come back and share within the next few months. We've learned a lot from our speakers, some of the challenges of COVID-19 with regards to mental resilience and how communities are responding also. We've also taken away some of the core things that we think that we should continue doing, for instance, about continuing to have the conversations on mental well-being and destigmatizing that. So all that is left for me now is to say thank you again for joining us and for your comments and questions. And hopefully we will be able to respond to any queries that you'll have later. Thank you to our DMU Invest team, and thank you all, and stay safe.